Welcome to the Dangerous Man Podcast, where we talk about how to become a better man, take responsibility for our mission, create value for others, and the many failures and lessons we've learned along the way. Stay dangerous. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Dangerous Man Podcast. This is your host, John Kostohris, joined by co-host
Adam Thooft. What's up, boys?
How are we doing today, guys? How are you doing, Adam?
Honestly, I'm a bit tired. We bit tired, but I'm ready to rock.
Dude, totally feel that here. Raise a hand if you're tired. Just kidding. I can't see you guys. It's a podcast. Got them. All right. Ab and I were discussing prior to, hitting record, as it works with technology, and just kind of getting into a little discussion about discipline. And we just were like, wow, I think we want to turn on and record, just kind of dig into some stuff that Adam's been reading about regarding discipline. And we just want to kind of dig into why that might be important as men, being disciplined and pursuing growing in discipline. Why don't you just take it away, Adam? Kind of introduce this for us.
Yeah, so I've been listening to the audio book of Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday. And it's just kind of inspiring because, really, he's just talking about discipline and using a lot of stories to talk about discipline. It's like, okay, there's this one guy, basically every single story is just like, hey, there's a person and they did this, and then this is how they were disciplined, and then this is how it led to them, their discipline leading to their success or what they did or their destiny, if you will. And that's why it's called Discipline is Destiny. No, I haven't listened to the whole thing.
Is there an element of this discipline connecting to my destiny? Is that kind of, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, like the discipline is what leads them there. It has a bunch of different examples. Most of the names of the people I'm like forgetting. I think Lou Gehrig is one of them, who is a huge baseball player for the Yankees, played at the same time as Babe Ruth.
So way back there.
Yeah, so way back there. And apparently, like, he took a lot better care of his body than Babe Ruth, and was able, and like, unfortunately he like ended up getting like ALS, but like he had like the most, he had the record for the most consecutive games that he started like playing, so he didn't miss a game, most consecutive. And for I forget how many it was, but I want to say it was like over 1,000 or more.
Yeah.
I don't remember the number off the top of my head.
I could definitely see that.
Someone could probably Google it very easily, but he and that record stood, I think, for like 70 years.
Jeez.
So, and that's him showing discipline of like, hey, like, he played even though he had a broken thumb, or like apparently they did like an X-ray and they found that his hands had like I think like a ton of different like fractures.
Wow.
But yeah, he just like played through them in baseball, and it was really interesting because it's like basically a lot of these examples is like, hey, like this guy, like Lou Gehrig, wasn't like, he was good, but like he wasn't, like, people wouldn't have picked him out as being like exceptional off the bat, And I think that's what Ryan Holiday tries to kind of get at, is there's a lot of examples of people who, could probably do have some talent at something, but their discipline is like what got them there. Like, they had maybe a little bit of talent, but not like a remarkable amount of talent, but it's the discipline, it's the consistency that really got them to where they were. And like I'm just like reflecting on that is like, wow, like, you know, lately I haven't been necessarily the most disciplined. In my
Sure.
life, I could be more disciplined. Um, and I want to be more like understanding of where I'm going. And I think like if you're more disciplined, you'll understand what direction you're heading in and what your purpose is and what your destiny will end up being. Um, but like I think at one point Ryan Holiday talks about you know, hitting the um
Baseball.
the snooze button in the morning, not
Oh,
baseball, but he does talk about hitting the baseball, but different example. He talks about the hitting the alarm the snooze button in the morning,
yeah.
and in that there's a lot of people that kind of waste a large portion of the day. Like everyone has the same 24 hours. Like there's no way who's has like a superhuman like amount of like stamina where they can, you know, do where they can like, you know, have the equivalent of 25 hours in a day. Like, but so many people just waste a lot of time with like people will hit the snooze button for like 5 minutes to an hour, like every day. And he literally, I'm pretty sure in the book, he literally said like, yeah, it's hard to get up in the morning. No one's a morning person. They just become a morning person.
They just have their schedule be mornings.
Yeah. And it's just having the discipline. And then like once you're disciplined in it, you know, it becomes easier. But um
Absolutely.
like that,
I'll testify to that
yeah,
with the
yeah,
mornings.
yeah, for sure. Um, but it's really that being able to actually like have discipline and be like, hey, we can get farther, but by just getting like just a little bit every day. Like
Hmm.
if you just get a little bit better, little tiny increments, that consistency, then you'll grow a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super. That's like, I know we had mentioned Atomic Habits, another
Hmm.
book on kind of, I'd say it's very discipline based,
Yeah.
habitual, focus. That book goes into a lot more science.
Yeah. Science of like building habits through a little bit of discipline. Like I
Yeah.
think Atomic Habits is all about like why when you're disciplined in something, doing that thing that you're disciplined on becomes easier eventually because you form a habit. And that's I think that and then that's what Atomic Habits is more talking about is like the science behind that.
And how would you contrast that with the book you're just reading right now?
He goes a lot less into the science and more into like the principle and like a lot more of inspiring you why you should do it through a lot of the stories.
Yeah.
Um and like, you know, he talks about like a guy who I think did a lot of like civil engineering for New York City, which is like
Mm.
crazy, like designing like different parkways and like I think like Niagara Falls Park he like laid out and designed. He did a bunch of other stuff in New York. I'm not super familiar with New York, so I don't remember all the things. But he was like for the state of New York, like a huge guy for designing everything. And it's like, how did he get like design all this stuff and get all this stuff done? And it's not it's and like the amount of stuff that he did over his like, I don't know, 40 plus year like career. Um,
Sure.
like Ryan Holiday is basically saying that like you wouldn't even really compare that to another person or another group. You'd compare it to like another civilization. um, and
Whoa.
and like he's using that point because that guy is I'm blanking on his name right now. You can read the book if you want to find out. um,
Check it out.
but he was basically saying that he kept his desk clean and clear. In fact, he would actually prefer to work on a large table because there's no drawers for him to hide anything.
Interesting.
So if there's something that he's working on, it's either he has to deal with it in some way or another. Either it gets done or he just completely gets rid of it, which made him a lot more productive. Like, you know, back in the day, a lot of them are historical examples, and I think it's just really cool that to like see like, hey, like this stuff isn't just like like something that's like new. Like discipline isn't something new. It's just always been there. And I think it's just like actually having people know about it, and also how like even like me thinking about like how I was grown up or how I went through like school and stuff. Like a lot of these
Mm.
things aren't even really like talked about as far as like the importance of it and like inspiring people of for like, hey, discipline is very important. Like I honestly think like,
Hmm.
I mean, yeah,
This
school,
strong sense of a why, communicating that why of discipline. You're saying,
yeah,
mm,
like why should you have discipline? Now, obviously, if you're usually good at school, you have a decent amount of discipline, but like for the people who aren't as doing well in school, and that I was one of those people, like being able to articulate properly to people who are in school, like why they should be disciplined. Um,
huh,
and I don't necessarily know how to do that specifically. What like as far as to like youth that are like in middle school or high school, why they should be disciplined.
right?
Because I feel like a lot of the time when you're in high school, there's not much you care about.
Yeah,
um, but
it's also just
yeah,
hard to like communicate to a 15-year-old,
uh-huh,
hey, or even like younger,
uh-huh,
like a fifth grade. It's just like, hey, the responsibility you take for your actions and the discipline and doing the things you're supposed to do and your responsibilities well will benefit you the rest of your life, and it will compound over time to your character. It's just like they're probably not thinking that long term. They're not able to really compute what that is. So it's like I know my dad would try
uh-huh,
to break it down a lot. He's like, hey John, like it builds character to do things that are hard, things you don't want to do. It's tough hearing that message,
mm-hmm,
as true as it is, when you're in middle school as a reason to do your homework. It's like that's not a
yeah,
strong enough value proposition that I can relate to at that
uh-huh,
age. Now I'm like, oh, screw any kind of emotional inspiration. Like, in a sense, just having that truth is really compelling to me as a man
yeah,
because it's important that I own that. But as a kid, it's like, so I like what you're saying about like,
mm-hmm. And
I,
I think it might be because like a lot of homework in school almost feels like it's just kind of like fake work. Like you're not actually doing anything of value.
what's the point of it?
You're just doing some like busy work. Whereas like
Yeah.
that's why I almost feel like actually working on some projects with like your dad or something like that would be way more beneficial than a lot of stuff that we learned in school. Um,
Right.
just because then it's like, oh, this is an actual problem that I need to fix. um,
Get me shoulder to shoulder with a man who's, you know, walking the walk, talking the talk. And I'm going to pick up way more about what it means to be a man, than I am going to be like with these hypothetical projects or this busy work, as you called it. That's a great way of putting it. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, I guess they're trying to teach us some concepts about history and math and science and all that, but it's like
mm-hmm,
some of it's just general education. It's like, oh, that's kind of nice to know, but it's like, how is that going to make me more money?
yeah.
Or
It's
how
like
is that going to help me love my family better? How is that going to help me, be more disciplined?
yeah,
Like I obviously see the value in the discipline of doing your work, but
it's like so. How does
formationally in my
Napoleon Bonaparte's failure at the Battle of Waterloo affect how I live my life?
right. It's like, can we look at history and be like, this is why it's important we study it? And there
Mhm.
wasn't enough like, we'd be like, oh, that's the end of the lesson, instead of like, how are we going to tie this back
Yeah,
to
like
being a more meaningful person?
yeah, like I almost feel like we just study
Whoa.
history to be like, hey, you have to memorize all these facts, remember these dates and all that. It's like, what about actually like I think the whole point of history should be to like learn lessons from history.
Yeah.
And that's the really cool thing that Ryan Holiday does in the book is he talks about historical things and pulls lessons out of them. And it's like that's what like history class should be, not just like, hey, memorize all this stuff because you have to pass the test. Eh.
Right. Like if I could get a bunch of people in the room and be like, hey, here's this great headline. Here's this great hook. right? Going back to like the hook story offer episode we did. Like, here's this great hook, and everyone's like, whoa. Like something like how Napoleon, learned this lesson and changed the world. And everyone's like, what? And then you tell the story of Napoleon, and then you're basically like, here's this and this about him. And I don't particularly have a history lesson all whipped up for you guys right now, but the point being, like, you can launch into this story, which is the history part, but like bring something of value after that. In the case of business, maybe more of an offer, like a sale, but like sell me on how this benefits my life and how this can form who I am as a person to be better. You know what I mean? Like, have an offer for me.
Yeah.
Be able to tie this back into something important.
And
a lot of kids I talk to, a lot of high schoolers are like, there's zero value that actually I bring into my life through this. And really the only thing I'm able to tell them is like, hey, like, learn how to learn so you can learn what you want to learn later. Yeah. And 2, form some discipline and character. It's like, none of those are sexy answers, No,
not at all. Not at all.
I'd rather say like, hey, let's rework the system so you can learn something that's a little more helpful for you.
I think if I were to just kind of rework the education system, I'd be able to be like, all right, everyone takes the test first. So then you know what you know and you know what you don't know. And then you actually go into like the lessons and be like, hey, this is why you should know this.
Before you go into the lessons, though, let me sell you on why you should know these things.
Yeah.
It's like get people amped up and like on fire to learn about these answers.
But like day one, you're taking the test. And then the teacher will know, hey, like what the class knows and what they don't know. But then also you can like be like, okay, this is why we're studying these things, to learn these lessons, and then actually like go through them, and then they'll actually, and then take the tests at the end and see like the improvement.
Yeah. What do you think, taking that kind of framework that you just kind of whipped up, how might you even apply that to your own life now to be able to like learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think in real life,
that's an interesting thought like you just had.
Like in life, when you're not in school, I feel like generally you take the test first.
In life. Okay, yeah.
Like sometimes you don't know something until you fail. Like, and you don't know you were supposed to know that until you fail.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I guess I need to, now that I've failed, I now need to go learn how to not fail at that. It's not, study for this random thing in the future, and then hopefully you might not fail at it. And like, it's so like
I'm thinking of the story you told with your own, door knocking, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of a, what's like, do you have a story that comes to mind for that, the test first?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not totally tracking with you.
With door knocking, like when you're going out for the day knocking on doors, it's not necessarily a time to like study and try to rethink how you're doing everything. It's just a time to like send what you already know and kind of test your knowledge to see what happens. So you kind of know what you're like doing right and what you're doing wrong. Because in life, it's not like you aren't like the teacher. There's not someone to like grade your life,
Yeah.
Like there's not someone to be like, hey, you're doing all this wrong and you're doing this right. You get a B+ on life,
I don't think I ever think about grades once in my life. Like I don't put a grade value in anything I do.
And
I'm just kind of like pass or fail,
Yeah, no. Like it's like, I'm like, it's like either I'm doing good or I'm doing bad. Like
right.
I never think of like of grades anymore because I don't like school. But and I think that's also another like huge thing with even like discipline in general is kind of knowing the long term versus the short term. Because we were chatting about this a little bit before we hit record.
Right.
But like with all of the different school stuff, like a lot of kids in like, junior high, middle school, high school, they're not really looking, they don't really have a plan a month out, much less a year out, much less 10 years out. They're just kind of thinking, oh, how do I have fun today? And it's kind of like that instant gratification type of thing. And I think it's very much fed by like social media and like video games and that kind of thing, where it's like, oh, you get what you want now. And it's kind of like scientifically, it's you're getting quick hits of dopamine, and your brain just gets used to that, or it's like, oh, this is something interesting. Okay, and something interesting, and something interesting, and something interesting.
And one more interesting thing,
and something interesting.
Yeah.
So like it's coming. Whereas like real life is like,
you could sit there for 3 hours and just be interested at things.
yeah. But in real life, it's like, hey, you might, work can sometimes just be boring, but you need to do it anyway. And then the gratification at the end, it would be way better. It's like, oh, like
it's a bigger payout of gratification.
Would you rather have the gratification of, beating a level in a video game, or knowing that your family has enough, you have enough money to feed your family for a year?
Dude. Or it's like even more than feed your family. Like,
you
dream what you would want to be covered for a year, every expense for a year.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm kind of saying. It's like, would you rather like beat a level in a video game, or know that you like can provide for your family for a year? Like,
right.
One is way more gratifying.
Yeah. It's, I kind of want to talk about my transition from being in high school to me even kind of like, I think I had this aversion to taking ownership and having responsibility in my life.
Yeah. And
so that kind of transition is something interesting that like I think relates to the disciplined conversation of, I very much dodged a lot of responsibility, and I was the kind of kid who I didn't like getting dirty. And I didn't really like working super hard. And my dad grew up on a farm in North Dakota, and he grew up doing all this, manual labor and, walking, you've seen all the memes. You've seen all the memes on television, on Instagram, talking about like how far your parents walk to school. Have you seen that on Instagram, Adam? Just like, it's like them skiing down a mountain and then like jumping off, and then their parachute comes off, and you're like, anyways, and my dad really much tried to pass on some of those values to me, but it's simple. It's like, look, I'm comfortable. I have a house. I'm in the city. I have nice things. I don't really see the point of me having to do all these hard things, Dad. Like, I'm not on a farm like you were. And, it wasn't until I had traveled around the country, with different people doing ministry work. And it wasn't until I moved to a different state, a different year from that. And, I'm starting to live my life by myself, without my family, without all of these comforts. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I have to provide for me. It's like, oh, okay, if I don't have this together, I'm not going to have a place I live, because I got to pay for that. And no one's going to be like, hey, John, we found you a place to live. Just sign the paperwork here. Signed, Mom. It's like, oh, I have to reach out and find, call apartments or fill out applications, or be like, or talk to friends and say, hey, do you know anyone that has like a rental open? Like, I have to do all of that work. Otherwise, I'm going to be continuing to couch hop. And like, that sucks, because I don't feel like I have my life together, because I don't. It's like, at the time, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I'm glad I wasn't on the streets, but what I'm saying is like, there's a level of like, sky's the limit on what I can do. I just have to be willing to work hard to do that. And I think it's interesting, because these messages are important to share. It's like, it's important to say that men have to work hard. It's important to
Yeah.
say that we have to take ownership and responsibility for our lives.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not going to resonate with some guys
Mhm.
because they don't have ears to hear.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you're going to have to learn that lesson a little bit longer
Mhm.
by going into life and just kind of, you have to get a little bit beat up and roughed up a bit by life to be like,
Yeah.
oh, I really understand what you're saying now, John.
Yeah.
And,
I think every man needs to like basically have some trauma in order to become a man. Whether that's just like facing hard times and be like, oh shit, I need to actually like be responsible for everything that I do.
dude, yeah, I know. And I think it's easy to like want to shortcut that for everybody.
Yeah.
Like I definitely, when I talk to a lot of people, it's like, oh, I definitely like some of the high schoolers that I get to help with our youth group, with our church. Like I love just being able to share a ton of my, quote unquote wisdom.
Mhm.
But it's like, what's really more helpful is honestly them discovering some of this by themselves.
Yeah.
But me being willing to like, when I hear them doing things that are awesome and I hear them kind of, being willing to think outside the box a bit, to like endorse that and encourage them
Mhm.
and kind of give them some praise for like, for being willing to like work a little harder and think a little bit more.
Yeah.
And, but obviously like as a single man, I don't have any children right now, but the thoughts definitely occurred to me of like, just knowing the way my own dad would
Yeah.
kind of bring these messages to me. I think that's something that I want to learn more about. And I think hopefully some of the people we can bring on this podcast and interview, we can dive into that a bit of like,
Mhm.
how do you be a father to kids and
Yeah.
how do you nurture them to take ownership so
Yeah.
that they kind of walk this journey without you just having to say, take ownership. And that's a question I don't necessarily have an answer to.
Like,
But
how do you sell your kids on taking ownership kind of thing?
totally.
Or it's like, oh, they understand like the benefits of taking ownership.
And
And
kind
it's
of
like being way more satisfied in your life instead of like just kind of, at the end of the day, like I had some fun, but there's nothing really satisfying. It's just kind of more stimulating rather than satisfying. And I think that's what a lot of our world
Totally.
is today. Is it's just stimulating. It's not really satisfying. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for when they're, as they call it, doom scrolling now on social media.
Doomsday.
Yeah, doom scrolling, where you're literally just scrolling down for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're looking for, but you're like, there's some kind of desire that you're looking for. And I think a lot of people they want to be satisfied, but really all that there is in like social media and video games is more or less like stimulation.
Sure.
I'd say video games are actually a little bit more satisfying than social media, because unless you're posting on social media, because in like video games, there's like,
Right.
oh, I like accomplished a thing in the video game. So that's like a little satisfying, but it's like
The creative expression there.
yeah, it's like 1,000th of the amount of satisfying is like, getting a sale when I'm knocking door to doors.
Yeah. And I think there's value, Adam, in, hey, like I go to college, maybe go and move across the country, like take a couple years to move out, to get away from mom and dad.
Yeah.
And to go do something. It's like, people often ask me like, oh, like, I don't really know what the right thing to do. Should I go to school? Should I get a job? Should I go to this school? Should I do that with this degree or that? And it's like,
Well, what do you want to do?
I'm not really convinced that it really matters. Long term, sure. I want you to be taking high leverage opportunities and putting out to get some skills and, starting to take ownership for your life. But like, I firmly believe God has used every step of my life to get to where I am today.
Hmm.
And I don't think I really could have, quote unquote, messed that up. Because I could have gone to college and done a traditional 4-year degree. I did a 2-year music degree. And I could have moved to a different state and done other things. And I'm not saying I would be sitting where I am today. Like, God obviously used my unique decisions to get me here. But
Yeah.
like I've learned so much from the routes I've taken, and
Yeah.
I've come so full circle with my mentality on the way I approach life and discipline, and have just kind of let life kick my butt a bit and realize the lessons I needed to realize. And he used my story to do that.
Yeah.
And I meet people, he uses their stories to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's like to really over communicate, like, oh, this is so important that you are disciplined. And obviously it is, and that's why we're talking about it. But if like that doesn't connect fully, I firmly believe that it will.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
God's going to connect to your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, he makes everything turn out for good in a way. He uses everything. Yeah. And I think that is really, really deep. Where it's like you like someone could choose to like go do a bajillion different things, but like at the end, as long as they're like searching for what is like the truth and the good and the beautiful, like you're gonna find it. And it's like whether you go work right after high school like I did, or go to a 4-year degree in college, like when we going to college, it's like, yeah, you get that to get your first job, but then after your like first job that you work for a while, your second job doesn't really care about your degree anymore. Maybe it cares about like the fact that you have a degree, but it looks more at your work experience than anything else.
Yeah.
So like it's really just, and the thing is, I think a lot of people put a lot of on like their career and like, oh, I have to find the thing that I'm passionate about. And it's like, yeah, but like, how do you even know? Like, it's so hard to know what you're passionate about unless you've actually done it for a while.
Yeah. No 18-year-old knows what his life passion and dream is.
Yeah.
Like he can't see that far ahead.
Yeah.
I've been there. I couldn't.
Yeah. And maybe they have something that they like at that time that they go into that then becomes their life passionate thing. But like,
do the best with what you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But like,
but the pressure to have it all figured out,
yeah, like
resonating with that.
At a certain point in my life, I was like, I'll do computer networking and stuff. But that's like, you're literally like behind a computer most of the day tapping away at it. And now like I think about that and I go a little bit because yeah. I'm like, no, I enjoy talking to people way too much to like want to be behind a computer all day. Like, yeah. And I do like computers and like problem solving stuff, but it's just like I thought I was this way, and I think most of it was because I played a lot of video games. But the people that I was with and the people that I talked to were a lot more satisfying. So I think people will find more satisfaction eventually, and I think that's can be found in having a lot of discipline. And being disciplined will help you find satisfaction instead of stimulation.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderfully said. And thanks for all of our listeners back home. I just want to encourage everybody to continue to commit to things that are tough and challenging. I think we're not always going to do things we like. We're not always going to do things that are fun. That doesn't mean it has to stay in the situation you're in now. If it's sucky, doesn't mean it has to stay like that long term. But I want to encourage you to press in and to be disciplined and to choose to do the hard thing, even just for the sake of this will build your character as a man to be able to do bigger and greater things. If you can do the simple, hard things, pressing into them, then when things get more complicated and you're dealing with more relationships or children, or bigger careers, you'll have more life experience to draw on to prove that you've already proved to yourself, saying, I can do this because I committed and did those things I hated. And I learned so much through that. And so if that's you, definitely get plugged in with some people you can talk to that can help you, you can share with, you can trust. But in the meantime, just take that next step forward knowing that this is going to help you become the man that you're called and created to be. Even if you don't see what that is like, it might take a few years to come to fruition, to a place where you can really understand that. And God has you where you're supposed to be today, and to continue to take those steps and just trust that he's got you. You've been listening to the Dangerous Man podcast. We're dropping episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So stay connected, guys. We just want to help men become a bit more dangerous, strong men along the journey as Adam and I ourselves walk this path. And join us next time. Until then, stay dangerous.